Hi everyone, Jordan here, and welcome once again to my channel where we discuss all things video games, books, TV, and films. Please help me out by subscribing to this channel, liking this video, hitting that notification bell, or just saying hi in the comments. It was a very special week this past week as the very first Resident Evil launched 25 years ago for the PlayStation 1. I can still remember I was only 10 years old and I first got a copy of the game, and obviously I immediately loved it. Despite the mature rating, my parents allowed me to play it. Well, I should say allowed, quote unquote, because I don't think they really knew about the game's mature rating, and they just really wanted me to shut up and not bother them again, so they just did not bother to check on the game's rating. Anyway, Resident Evil is the video game that truly pioneered and defined the survival horror genre. In the 25 years since it launched, we've been treated to a ton of amazing sequels, spin-offs, a prequel, and even a TV series coming up on Netflix, all without a shortage of gore and blood. So to honor the 25th anniversary of the Resident Evil game, which effectively means it's also the 25th anniversary of the franchise, I am going to list my 25 favorite things or moments in the series. I'm going to go chronologically here and begin with the very first Resident Evil and then go from there. Here we go. Who can forget the very first zombie that you encountered? It's iconic, it's spooky, it's scary, it deserves to be the first on this list. We later learn that this zombie's victim is Kenneth, your comrade from the Bravo team, and this is the zombie that would be the first of hundreds of zombies that you'd face throughout the series. Number 2 on this list is Barry Burton's dialogue. Resident Evil is known for such cheesy dialogue, but no one did it better than Barry Burton. Here are a few examples.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich. Just a moment. I found something.
What is it?
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things. Better take it with you.
But how about you, Barry?
I have this.
There certainly is no shortage of cringe-worthy dialogue from Barry, but this adds to the Resident Evil lore. The third one on this list are dogs and hunters. I have to say, when I first played the game, I really panicked when the dogs burst through the windows and I ended up being hit many times. That made me very cautious when the camera pans like this. In addition, the hunters, which become the de facto enemy after you get back to the mansion following the defeat of Plant 42, is pretty scary because they're fast and deadly and can easily kill you with a few hits. Number 4 on this list is the very first Tyrant. Who can forget the Tyrant in Resident Evil 1? He was grotesque, large, dangerous, but can easily be beaten with a rocket launcher. Seriously, the Tyrant is a very apt ending to the game and would later inspire more superpowered enemies in the Resident Evil sequels. Number 5 is the launch of Resident Evil 2. Now, RE2 built on what RE1 did and made it so much better. From the two overlapping storylines of Leon and Claire to the introduction of characters such as Ada and Sherry. We're also treated to memorable enemies such as the giant alligator, the licker, and of course a lumbering giant tyrant called Mr. X. He is number 6 on my list, and who can forget the very first encounter with this lumbering, seemingly indestructible giant? While his stature alone is intimidating, it's his lack of facial expression, his killer stoic look, and his relentless pursuit of you, which is what really makes him scarily memorable. Number 7 is the iconic police station. Everyone who's ever played Resident Evil 2 knows that the police station is very iconic as you spend a majority of your time navigating the area. And of course, there's the timeless, eerie soundtrack that we'll never forget. Number 8 on this list is the Resident Evil 3 launch. Now, Resident Evil 3 is pretty awesome, maybe not as transformational as Resident Evil 2. It was more action-oriented, it introduced choices that have impacts on the game, and it was really a relatively short game. It shows what a badass Jill Valentine is, especially as she tries to escape a monster that is relentlessly chasing her because it wants her dead. And that monster is the Nemesis. It is perhaps one of the most iconic and terrifying monsters not just in Resident Evil, but also in video game history. While other tyrants in Resident Evil are terrifying, Nemesis' intelligence, strength, and ferocity is unmatched. And who can forget his trademark dialogue? The moment you hear that on screen, you immediately run, or if you have enough firepower, you take him down for some bonus items. Really scary, really iconic, and he is number 9 on my list. Number 10 is Resident Evil Code Veronica. This was probably the best Resident Evil at the time of the launch because it featured a lot of firsts, including the fact that it uses real-time 3D environments and dynamic camera movements unlike the first 3 games, which had pre-rendered backgrounds. Other than that, it retains the key elements that the original games had, including the signature controls, puzzles, zombies, and so on and so forth. The story is one of the best in the series because it featured the reunion of siblings Chris and Claire Redfield, as well as the return of Albert Wesker, whom many thought was killed in Resident Evil 1. Number 11 is Resident Evil 0. So before the events of the first Resident Evil, Bravo team was sent to investigate the cannibalistic murders in Arklay, and Resident Evil 0 essentially is the story of how Bravo team ended up on that mansion. The gameplay controls are largely the same as the first games. However, in Resident Evil 0, you control 2 protagonists, Rebecca and Billy, at the same time using the zapping system, which allows you to switch between the 2 throughout the game. Each character has unique abilities, and it's this system that's key to solving many puzzles in the game. The story, the atmosphere, the enemies, the gameplay are all terrific. The game also does a good job of creating a haunting and spooky atmosphere that keeps you on your toes. I did dislike the inventory system because you had no item boxes. Instead, you drop off an item in a room and you can come back to that later. I found it a bit troublesome, but it's still a very good game. We now go to the game that has redefined the series. Oh yes, it's Resident Evil 4. This is the game that significantly changed the gameplay from its predecessors by focusing on the action and over-the-shoulder camera. There's a lot of emphasis on the shooting and less so on the survival horror elements. The inventory system was also overhauled using a grid system, and this is really one of the Resident Evils that I played over and over again because even though it was a departure from the previous game, it was such a refreshing and incredible game at the time. The voice acting, the narrative, the characters are all superb, which is why it's not surprising it won many Game of the Year awards in 2005. Number 13 on this list is the action and co-op play in Resident Evil 5 and 6. After Resident Evil 4 followed Resident Evil 5 and 6. Both totally abandoned the survival horror genre and functioned more as action games. While this really worked in Resident Evil 5 and in some cases in Resident Evil 6, many fans, including myself, felt the need to return to its survival horror genre. Like Resident Evil 4, there is a huge emphasis on shooting, leveling your weapons, quick time events, and again, a lot more shooting. Both had very memorable boss fights and pretty good stories, but some felt it veered too far from its roots. Still, I loved them both, and being a fan of the series, I loved the fact that I got to play Resident Evil 5 with my brother Irvin. Number 14 is the return of Jill Valentine. So after a long absence since RE3 Nemesis, Jill returns in Resident Evil 5, but she's being controlled by Wesker, and I think this twist was pretty compelling considering how much she's loved in Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 3. Her character saw some pretty significant changes from RE3, but she's still pretty badass. You eventually face her in battle and turn her back to your side when you kill Wesker for good. Speaking of Wesker, this man deserves his own spot on the list. Why? Well, there's a variety of reasons. His swanky haircut, stoic personality, and his sunglasses, which he wears pretty much everywhere, including indoors. Wesker was initially part of the STARS Alpha team as its commanding officer and was secretly acting as a double agent for Umbrella. He is thought to be dead in Resident Evil 1, but comes back alive as he injected himself with the T-virus, which gave him his superhuman strength, speed, and regeneration, and these are all shown in Resident Evil Code Veronica. We find out the true motives of Wesker when he becomes the main villain in Resident Evil 5. Here we see some of the most badass, almost Matrix-esque type of moves from him, which makes him even more of a formidable villain. Resident Evil wouldn't be what it is without Wesker, so I'm glad the series gave him the spotlight and the death he deserved. Number 16 on my list is Resident Evil Remaster and the HD Remaster. 6 years after the release of Resident Evil 1, Capcom remakes the game exclusively for GameCube in 2002 and then ported a remastered version for the PS3 and PS4 in 2015, which in my opinion is one of the best moves they've ever done. I thoroughly enjoyed revisiting the game with visually stunning graphics, great controls, and an enjoyably scary experience. I love the fact that they added a terrifying new enemy, Crimson Zombies, which are zombies that come back to life, but stronger and faster only if the player does not burn the zombie he or she kills. I love seeing the original zombie in HD, the dogs, the hunter, the tyrant, and of course Barry's dialogue, which in my opinion is one of the best Resident Evil games in the series. Number 17 on my list is Ada Wong. She deserves her own slot here simply because she is such a compelling character. First of all, I love that there's Asian representation all the way back to the very first Resident Evil 2, but what makes Ada such an interesting character is her moral ambiguity. She is clearly there for her missions, but she also deeply cares for Leon. She is charismatic, cunning, and mysterious, and we can get to appreciate this throughout the series. Number 18 on the list is the launch of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Now, I was initially skeptical of this game at first, mainly because it was a new protagonist and it was in first-person mode. Little did I know that these two elements would make the game so outstanding. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard basically brings the series back to its survival horror roots, but takes it a step further by going first-person mode only. Although this was a very polarizing move, this allowed the player to really immerse themselves in the terrifying world of Resident Evil 7 in an atmosphere that is constantly filled with dread and anxiety. It is scary, it's heart-racing, it's bold, and it essentially reinvented the gameplay in the Resident Evil series. Number 19 is the Baker family. Speaking of Resident Evil 7, one of the reasons the game is so compelling is because of the Baker family, who are the main antagonists of the game. We first meet them at dinner, which is probably one of the most memorable moments of the game as you get a glimpse of just how deranged this family is. Look at what they're eating. Ugh. Anyway, you face them throughout various parts of the game as they try to stop you from rescuing Mia. This features some of the most terrifying battles in the game as they try to maim, torture, and kill you. However, we do learn that they are under control by Evelyn, the main boss, which paints them in a very different light towards the end of the game. Number 20 on the list is Resident Evil 2 Remake. Of course, there needs to be an entry for Resident Evil 2 Remake alone. Not only was it faithful to the original game, it reimagined it from the ground up using over-the-shoulder camera, incorporating the action-oriented gameplay from Resident Evils 4, 5, and 6, but also maintaining its survival horror roots. And of course, experiencing all of this in glorious 4K, next-generation graphics, made it truly an astonishing game and one of the best games out there today. Number 21 is Resident Evil 3 Remake. Less than a year after Resident Evil 2 Remake was launched, Capcom dropped a remade version of Resident Evil 3. Like Resident Evil 2 Remake, the game looks absolutely stunning in 4K graphics, and it also follows the same gameplay controls, save for a few additions. Like the original RE3, it's more action-oriented and relies on moment-to-moment gameplay and a handful of quick-time events. My only criticism of this is that it is too short, but it's still worth your time. Number 22 are the next-gen versions of Nemesis and Mr. X. The Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes modernized these two tyrants and allowed us to experience their terror once again in 4K. If they were scary before, they sure are a lot scarier now. They also have newer tricks up their sleeve, which makes facing them again both challenging yet thrilling at the same time. I'm just glad Capcom remade these two games so more people today can experience fighting two of the most relentless enemies in the Resident Evil franchise, while also allowing old gamers like me to re-experience the horror and the terror of these two tyrants. Number 23 are the minigames and side games of the Resident Evil series. One great part about the Resident Evil series are the additional content or minigames you unlock after finishing the main games. These include the Mercenaries mode, the Fort Survivor, Tofu Survivor, Ghost Survivors, Not a Hero, etc., etc. The series does a fantastic job of making you keep playing the game, especially as you get to control characters you couldn't play in the main game, and I hope they continue to do this in future series. Number 24 are the various unlockables across the Resident Evil series. One thing I really enjoy with the Resident Evil series is the ability to unlock costumes, infinite ammo, and other good stuff, provided you finish the game in a certain way or you complete certain objectives. This really provides a great incentive for you to replay the game with improved gear or higher difficulty, or play the game again but in a different way from the first playthrough. I hope the game continues to do this in the future because it's such a fun element to the Resident Evil series, and it's key to keeping the fans coming back for more. Number 25 for me is the future. As I say this here, I look to the future, which is Resident Evil Village, and it hasn't been launched. It's going to launch in May. This is a direct sequel to Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, and if these early trailers are any indication, it looks absolutely incredible. The enemies look terrifying, including this gigantic lady. The graphics look awesome, and there's werewolves. The game also dropped a demo earlier this year, and it was absolutely scary. I cannot wait to play the actual game. So that's my 25 best moments in Resident Evil history, or the 25 things I like about Resident Evil in honor of its 25th anniversary. I'm one of those fans who've played every single major release at least, and I look forward to keep playing for the next 25 years or so. What about you? What are your favorite moments in Resident Evil history? I'm really curious to see what you think. Thanks so much for watching. Please help me out by subscribing to this channel, liking this video, saying hi in the comments, and hitting that notification bell. See you next time. Bye-bye.